Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Clean in Place Chemical Contamination. This webinar will be hosted by Val Weiler, Eurofins SF Analytical Laboratories. I'm Amy Knock, and I'll be moderating today's session. Val, I'll now pass the webinar over to you. You may begin.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I'm going to give you just a little bit of introduction. So my name is Val Weiler. I'm the Director of Client and Sample Management here at Eurofins SF Analytical. We're one of the branches of Eurofins. My background is in forensic science. I have a master's in forensic science. I've been working in the contaminants and toxicology space since I graduated. I spent 4 years as a clinical toxicologist, and since then I have been at Eurofins, going on about 8 years now. So a little bit about Eurofins SF Analytical. We're one of the chemistry labs within the broader Eurofins US Foods network. We are located we have labs in both New Berlin, Wisconsin and Tustin, California. Between the two labs, we have over 40 scientists, 3 of which have PhDs, several different types of instrumentation, LCs, GCs, ICs, microscopy, SEM. We specialize in problem solving and investigation-based analysis. So within the Eurofins network, there's lots of different branches, particularly within US Foods. We have chemistry, microbiology, product development, and then we are more of a specialty investigation-based lab. We like to refer to ourselves as lab to call when you need to find the missing piece to your puzzling case. So we're that kind of that 1% when we're almost there and you just need a little bit more information to help solve the problem at hand. So briefly, clean in place chemical analysis, contamination. So clean in place is a process employed to clean and disinfect equipment without having to completely shut down a line. So you don't have to disassemble. I'm not going to go into too much details of how these are conducted. My assumption will be that you have a good background in clean in place, hence why you'd like to attend this webinar. But if you have any questions or need assistance with helping design or making sure that your process is efficient, please let us know and we will have someone, either myself or someone who specializes in this within the Eurofins network, reach out. So the benefits of clean in place is that you can disinfect all of your materials without shutting down your lines, which increases productivity. The caveats of that is it needs to be consistent and repeatable so that you can depend on it. Different types of chemicals are used for clean in place depending on the needs. These are some of the most common in different categories. You have caustic, so your basic reagents such as NaOH, which is going to soften the fat and help to clean that out. Acids such as nitric or phosphoric help to remove scale, and often they're used following caustic reagents to help rebalance the pH of the equipment. Sanitizers and disinfectants are also used to help reduce microorganisms. These have changed over the years. The gold standard to begin with was hypochlorite, also known kind of as bleach. As you know, if you have stainless steel, bleach will corrode it over time if it's not rinsed away properly. So then the move was to chlorine dioxide, which is a little less corrosive, and now peracetic is even more common, which is the least corrosive of these. For some purposes, sterilizers such as high pressure steam are used. This is primarily in the pharmaceutical industry. And the last one to mention is surfactants. Which ones you use in your system depend on what is running through it and what needs to run through next. If you're running the exact same things every time, you can kind of keep one system. Depending on what you need to do. So if you have one flavor and then you need to run another flavor, it may be sufficient to rinse with water or a quick sanitizer. If you're moving to a completely different type of product, you may need to do a little bit more sanitation. Why is the contamination an issue? So for this, there could be lots of issues with this. The first thing that you need to know is, did it occur? So contamination is going to come from many places. Most common is probably human error, which is where most issues come from. This could be something wasn't flushed properly, something got left on overnight. Could be a dilution error. So think of all of the different cleaning products have a dilution recommendation to have them be most effective. If you over dilute, you're not going to clean as you expected, and you may have some contamination from microorganisms. Or if you don't dilute enough, you may not get all of your cleaner out, which then is going to cause this contamination issue that we're discussing today. This can also affect multiple production lots. You know, if you have product that you need to clear before it can go out into the market, this may require you to have a lot of product sitting in a warehouse that can't be moved. If this is refrigerated or frozen storage, now we're talking about increased warehouse space that you have to account for. And also if you have to shut down your line, you know, as we know, the longer production line is at a standstill, the dollars tick up every minute that isn't being in use. So this is why this is a really important issue. Want to address it right away. The first things you want to look at is, you know, did an issue occur? So things you might want to suspect that there could be an issue is if you're having products that aren't meeting specifications. So if you're looking through your normal quality control, your release testing, and something doesn't match, particularly a pH, if you're using caustic or acidic sanitizing reagents, if there's some sort of unknown residue on the line, or anything of that sort, or if the product it's been reported to have kind of a chemical flavor or odor, this may also indicate that there's some sort of contamination issue, either your clean place chemicals, or perhaps there is a you know, a leaking gasket somewhere, you know, an O-ring isn't, you know, working as it should. These are all things where you want to really kind of dive in and see what the issue is. How do you want to design your approach? So first thing we have is we suspect there is in fact a contamination of some sort. The next thing you need to know is, okay, was there a contamination? So things to gather are any SDS of the suspected contaminants, and this is going to be important to design the experimental approach, which I'll discuss later. The next is, you know, kind of outline all the reasons to suspect the contamination. All those things are going to be important to any lab that's going to help you investigate to make sure that they're getting to the root cause for you. How many lots and SKUs that are affected? This is important to determine what all needs to be tested to make sure it's safe. Do you need, you know, is the issue seem to only be at the beginning of a lot? Or is it also all the way through? Is it multiple lots that affected? That can really help to get to what the root of it is. Is it just, okay, the rinse needs to be longer? Then you may just see it at the beginning of the production run. But if you have multiple runs that are at cause, then you start to look into what is the common denominator between those. The other thing that's important to determine is, what do you need to submit? You know, is it the product itself to make sure that that is, to see if that's contaminated, to see if you can release it for market. Also, as you described, you know, to test, is it the beginning, middle, end of the run, multiple runs, or test product. Another option would be to test a rinse solution. So if you want to make sure that your clean in place chemical has been rinsed out, we've had several investigations like this. Client just wants to make sure that once they put it through, the rinse is doing its job properly without having to actually go through and test product. And the other one is swabs. I'll go through an example later using swabs where they were really trying to get at where is the contamination coming from. So in that case, we'd use some environmental swabs, test multiple different places within the line. So once you have everything pulled together to see, you know, want to determine if there is a contamination event, then we want to design the approach. Here at Eurofins SF Analytical, here's some approaches and techniques that we would recommend and when they are used. One is going to be physiochemical analysis, moisture, pH, peroxide kits. Some of these clean in place chemicals have peroxides within them that you can detect. The most common is through a commercial kit. pH can also be indicative. With this, the lab would always want to know what is your normal pH range so that we can make sure that any differences we're seeing are going to be significant. ICP is going to be helpful for looking at the different elements that are present. This is most important, whenever we're looking at designing a clean in place chemical contamination investigation. We want to look at all of the different components of the cleaner, which means that they're broken up into their component parts if it's an ionic reaction, interaction between the compound. So if we're looking at sodium hydroxide, perhaps pH should be one indicator, but maybe we can look for the sodium. Is sodium elevated in the sample? This isn't always helpful. Sometimes it can be, sometimes not. It depends on if those elements are also present in significant amounts in the sample itself. Ion chromatography. So this is going to use anions and cations to determine if any of those are present. Examples are chlorate, chloride, nitrate, nitrite, phosphates. These are also common in some of the clean in place chemical that we may be looking for. Ion chromatography, if you're not familiar, it's a chromatographic system that's going to separate them based on their ionic charges. GC, anything that's volatile, we're going to look for via the GC. Most common with this is solvents, but quite a few different options are going to be available with that, depending on what is in the cleaner. And the last that we utilize is liquid chromatography, and this is going to be for items that are non-volatile. The most common one we see are sulfonates. So a lot of them will have very long, very complicated names. But if you see sulfonate anywhere in the name, we're going to look for it via LC. That's a great tip off for us. In our house, we have MS, UV, and high resolution mass spec that we utilize for this purpose. So if you're looking for an analytical lab to help with your clean in place chemical contamination, there's two types of labs you can look to do testing with. The first type is your routine testing lab. You may be using for release testing, maybe doing nutritional analysis. And those are generally going to focus on certain types of tests or samples, food, pharmaceuticals, environmental. They're very experienced in the testing that they do. They tend to have a high throughput focus. A non-routine testing lab is going to specialize in, just as we said, the non-routine. So they're looking at complex problems, really getting to the heart of what the matter is, designing the experimental approach to meet the need. So rather than more of a one size fits all, it's going to be a much more custom solution. Often we'll utilize a wide range of techniques using orthogonal approaches if necessary. And in this case, usually it's, you want someone who's experienced at problem solving and you'd like a direct access to the science if you can get it. That's going to be able to get you all the answers that you need. What should you look for when you're looking for a lab to help you with your investigations? First, make sure there's no conflict of interest. You want to make sure they're independent and objective. This is important if you're looking at, going to a can you see what a co-packer has going on, or if you're looking at any sort of insurance claim, can you ask for client references, making sure if you need to, you can do confidentiality or attorney-client privilege, making sure that they have the capabilities that you need to perform this testing. Does the turnaround time able to meet what you need? As we said, every day your line is down, that is money that you're not being able to put in. So making sure that the lab can do it quickly. The other is instrumentation experience. Do they have the specific experience that needed for this complex type of investigation? And when you're talking to them, they should be asking very specific targeted questions and not general. That's usually a really good tip off of, have they conducted this type of investigation before? Results. What you want to look for in results is there some sort of interpretation? Is there a report? Just having a straight C of A is probably not going to be as helpful in this situation unless you have scientists on your end that's able to interpret it. Again, are the scientists asked the right questions for you? Do you think that you're getting what you need? Are they able to help you determine the source of the cause? This may require a couple different rounds of testing. If the first round, if we test the product, we say, okay, yes, there is a contamination, then you may want to go the next step to see, well, where is this contamination if you don't have an idea up front? So there may be other rounds, really you want to look for someone who's going to partner with you and help you get to the end of your investigation. At this point, I'd like to go through a few different case studies just to kind of highlight all of the things that I've talked about thus so far. So the first case study is a contamination event in milk. So what you see on the left is the table of ingredients from the SDS of the suspected contaminant. So whenever I look at these, what I'm looking for is what is the most, what can I pick out the easiest to be able to quantify? What can I detect the easiest that's going to be different from sample to sample? So in this case, acetic acid. I wouldn't expect a ton of acetic acid to be in the milk. I can compare with a control that doesn't have contamination, compare it to the suspected contaminated sample. And so what we found is that it indeed was contaminated. We were able to use a sample of the cleaner itself as a kind of a quote unquote reference standard. So what we did was we looked at the amount of acetic acid in the cleaner. We're able to then determine, okay, what percentage of this was cleaner. And then we're able to use the amount of acetic acid that we found in the suspected milk and actually determine how much cleaner was in the milk. This helps, from a client perspective to see, okay, how contaminated is it really? How big is the issue? How much is leaking in? What was the issue? Was it over, under diluted? Or do we need to do more rinsing and really help to get to the root of the issue? In this case, the client wanted to determine where in the facility the contamination was occurring. They knew they had a contamination issue. They didn't know where it was coming from. So what they did was throughout the entire line, they did environmental swabs of the line before and after the rinse. So they, ran their CIP through, they did it, they swabbed, then they did the rinse, swabbed again. And what they could see is that, through this, they were able to find exactly where in this line this contamination issue is coming from. In this case, as you can see from my table here of the different ingredients in the CIP chemicals, we use dimethyl glutarate. The dipropylene glycol methyl ether wasn't as we weren't able to, the instrumentation wasn't as sensitive for that compound as we expected. And so we used dimethyl glutarate because we had a greater sensitivity and thus we were able to detect lower. In the third case study, there was a suspected contamination of yogurt. The reason they suspected it was because they were getting complaints that it had an off flavor. In this case, over and over, they kept hearing it has a chemically flavor, which may or may not mean CIP contamination, but that's what they wanted to look for in this case, just to make sure that that was not the issue. So in this case, there's not a clear smoking gun that I could point to easily detect via GC or LC. If there is, those are generally kind of my go-to because those are going to be the most specific because I can use a mass spec to make sure I have the exact compound that I'm looking for. In this case, there wasn't one. So this CIP kind of cocktail was a caustic solution of sodium hydroxide followed by an acidic nitric acid. And then there's a disinfectant solution they use, which was sodium hypochlorite. So I kind of had to break things apart and look for a couple of different things. And this is where the orthogonal approach really comes in. So the pH we tested versus the contaminated product and the product that was giving the off flavor to one that was getting good results. pH was similar. I looked at sodium because the sodium hydroxide is going to dissociate. Sodium was similar between the two. We looked for chlorate and chlorite, which would be indicative of the sodium hypochlorite. We didn't find any of that. However, we did find nitrate, which was elevated in the suspected sample. And that's indicative, that suggests to us that perhaps the nitric acid is higher than it should be. That the client would then need to go back to their line, make sure that the dilutions were correct, that following, that cleaner, that everything was being rinsed properly, testing the rinse solution, making sure that everything is rinsed out before they start running the samples again. This one is an interesting case as well. Not your typical clean in place chemical contamination, but just kind of highlights the overall approach and how it can be used. For this one, they wanted to make sure this client uses an antimicrobial in their cleaning, and they wanted to make sure that after they use it and they rinse that away, that there's no additional antimicrobial residue left on the chicken. And so for this purpose, there wasn't a clear commercial offering anywhere that we could find easily in chicken for this antimicrobial. And so we developed a method and validated it for the purpose of the antimicrobial. We're able to screen all of the products that they currently had. And then we're also able to use this as a routine analysis for this client so that they can then screen their products periodically as part of their quality assurance program to make sure that they are continuing to remove it as part of their process. The last case study I have for you today is a surfactant in a jerked meat. So in this situation, the client wanted to test for residual surfactant in their beef jerky. So the clean and place system accidentally ran overnight. Once again, as I said, usually it's going to be human error of some sort. And so they had 250,000 pounds of product that was potentially contaminated. That's a lot of product sitting there that can't be sold until you know what's wrong. So in this case, we utilized a UV method to be able to look for this particular surfactant. And then we're able to determine and screen all of the different runs of lots of product, different points in the process to make sure that this product was in fact safe to go to market. So for our purposes, once we have the investigation completed, so we know, okay, did a contamination event occur? Yes. Okay, how bad is it is the next question. So conduct the investigation, determine what the contamination is, how many lots are affected, what parts of the lots. And then from there, you can then take a look at the process and say, okay, now we have this product that can clear, this can't. The next step may also be conducting, consulting with a toxicologist if there is a contamination to determine if it's safe to go to market with the product, even with the contamination, yes or no. And that's really going to depend on, how much product you have sitting, waiting to go. And then the last steps for the investigation that would be done kind of in-house is then how do you prevent it from happening again? For this one, it was clearly, reminders not to let it run overnight. But someone may be, okay, is there an extra rinse that needs to be done? Do we need to make sure that the dilution instructions are clearer? Anything of that sort to kind of round out your quality process. So in conclusion, there's lots of techniques that can be used to look for the presence and extent of the clean in place chemical contamination. Really when you're looking for a lab, you want to look for a lab that has the capabilities that you need, a broad range of techniques, and that is willing to discuss the different techniques with you and really give a recommendation on what they're going to perform. The techniques need to be designed and modified based on what the contamination potential is. As we saw through the case studies, there's no one size fits all. There's no, here is the contamination test code. Everything is going to be based on what is the cleaner, what is in it. One technique will not work for something else. If you've got a cleaner that's non-volatile, well, running a GC isn't going to get the answer. So making sure that the lab that you're working with really understands the different techniques and the different approaches that are necessary. Again, the other thing to keep in mind is that there's many factors to consider if engaging. How widespread is it? What's the end goal? If you're looking at $5,000 worth of product and that's a small drop in the bucket, may not be worth the investigation. But if you've got 250,000, that may be worthwhile to investigate. So going forward, if you have any questions, let us know. Here is my contact information. Let us know if Eurofins can help you in any way. And at that, I will take questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So at this point, then, I would like to transition into the Q&A session. So we have had a few questions that have come into the chat. So the first one that has come in is, if a contamination is suspected, what information should I gather in order to expedite an investigation?
Yeah, so the first thing that the lab is going to want to know is what information do you have regarding the suspected contamination? What What's leading you to suspect the contamination to begin with? Is it an off flavor and off odor? Is there a residue that's present? Anything of that sort, that's going to be important. The next piece would be, if you suspect it's the cleaner, what is the SDS for those? The other thing I'd like to mention here as well is that this approach can also be used for other types of contamination within the line. We've used the same approach not just for cleaners, but also for lubricants. And recently I had one that it was one of the cooling lines. So it was kind of supposed to be a closed system that they found was no longer a closed system. So the same type of approach can be used for any type of contamination within the line. We just want to have the SDS. The next piece of information that is important is, what are we going to be testing? Is it the product? Is it the rinse solution? Is it the swab? Again, a reputable lab that's used to this type of investigation, they'll be able to chat with you and make sure that they have the best approach, and they can consult you on what would be they would recommend. And the last is, how much product are we talking about? Are we looking at multiple SKUs? Are we looking at beginning of the run, all the way through the run? Knowing exactly how big of the scale of the project is important for the lab, so we make sure that we devote the proper resources to it.
Wonderful. Thank you for that guidance. The next question is, what is the best analytical approach to determining if a contamination occurred?
The best approach is going to be one that fits the need. So again, as I said, there's no one size fits all. We need to make sure that we've designed the approach to meet whatever the current need is, whether it's needing to look at the pH, or if it's all the way through high res LCMS. Really, it's dependent on what the exact nature of the contamination is.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. The next question that has come in here, and let me pull it up. Val, can Eurofins work with independent toxicologists or recommend a toxicologist to offer toxicity risk opinion, product safety opinion for product suspect to be contaminated with CIP chemicals or agents?
Yes, we can. So we have, within our Eurofins quality assurance group, we have several toxicologists that we can work with, depending on what the need is. And we can either engage them with you or refer you so that you can have that safety assessment addressed.
Wonderful, thank you. In this one, what test do you typically use when looking for peracetic acid?
Oh, peracetic acid.
Peracetic
we
acid.
don't.
Okay.
So peracetic acid dissociates very quickly, and it breaks down very quickly. It's not easy to find, and that's why in the example where I think it was the one with acetic acid, I didn't look for the peracetic acid, and that's because it's hard to find, because it's going to break down so quickly within the system. And so usually in those cases, I will look and see, is there anything else in this cleaner that I can look for and identify to use as the marker rather than the peracetic acid.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Val. I'm just looking at the questions here, and it looks like we are all caught up with the questions. So I think that should wrap it up today. And again, thank you so much, Val, for the presentation today. And thank you so much for everyone attending. And we really appreciate your time.
Thank you guys so much. Let us know if you need anything else.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.